Tony Soprano lived like a king and died broke. Junior lived like a nobody and paid $1 million in cash. Here's the part of the show no one talks about. In a world where mobsters bleed money like open wounds, horses, girlfriends, gambling, and restaurants with more front than function, Corrado Jr. Soprano emerges as the improbable poster child for financial restraint. Yes, that Junior. The aging curmudgeon who spends more time muttering into his upholstery than actively participating in this thing of ours. Yet somehow, when it's time to go to trial in Season 4, Junior casually mentions his lawyer is charging him $1 million, plus $50,000 for audibility experts, whatever that means, and a smattering of other fees, and he's paying it in cash. Where exactly does a man like Junior Soprano get his hands on a cool $1 million for legal defense? After all, his reign as boss lasted all of 3 chaotic months before Tony shunted him aside and took the wheel. The optics don't add up, especially when, a few seasons later, the actual boss, Tony Soprano, is scraping under the couch cushions to scrounge up enough to not repay a $200,000 bridge loan from Hesh. Tony, who's been running the family for 5 years at that point, can't muster even a partial repayment. Junior, who hasn't been truly active in the game for ages, is paying 7-figure lawyer bills like he's renewing a golf membership. What gives? Let's begin with the obvious. Junior doesn't spend. No gumas, no horses, no 6,000 square foot house in North Caldwell. No sleek cars for a non-existent trophy wife. Just the same tired sofa, the same modest house in the old neighborhood, and a lifestyle so low-key it's practically underground. Literally, in the case of his saving strategy, he buried the cash in his backyard, poorly wrapped, and promptly forgot about it, thanks to gophers and senility. But for all his quirks, Junior was a captain for decades and remarkably savvy about keeping his financial slate clean. His lawyer reveals he was only arrested once, way back in 1968, and he even paid his taxes. A career criminal who respected the IRS? Shocking, but effective. He wasn't flashy, but he was shrewd. He didn't earn headlines, he earned, and he hid it well. When Tony references the big pile of cash Junior's allegedly sitting on, Junior snaps back that his finances are nobody's business. And frankly, they weren't, because he made sure of it. Unlike his nephew, who hemorrhages money to maintain an image he can't afford, Junior practiced old-school thrift, disguised as cranky miserliness. He lives as if he's broke, but his circumstances never actually worsen throughout the series. That's the trick, pretending to be poor while quietly sitting on wealth. In contrast, Tony's lifestyle is a black hole of liquidity. Lavish spending, multiple homes, luxury cars, mistresses, boat engines with more horsepower than sense. Every dollar burns a hole in his pocket on the way to someone else's. Add to that the financial weight of an actual family, a high-maintenance wife, private school kids, and the constant need to look like a boss, and Tony's finances were never going to resemble stability, let alone solvency. So yes, Uncle Junior pays his $1 million legal bill because he can. Not by earning more, but by simply not spending. In a criminal underworld obsessed with status and splendor, Junior's miserly lifestyle makes him the richest man in the room. Ironically, it's the guy who looked the poorest all along who managed to keep it all. Vito didn't die because he was gay. He died because everyone else was spineless. In the grand parade of double standards that is The Sopranos, few storylines are as bleakly revealing as the death of Vito Spatafore. It's almost laughable how quickly a man's happiness becomes a death sentence, particularly when that happiness is expressed with a rope trick and a smile in a gay bar. For one rare moment, Vito exhaled. He danced. He existed. And naturally, that couldn't be allowed. Let's be clear, Vito wasn't just another soldier in the ranks. He was ambitious, focused, and, by mob standards, a stellar earner. But none of that mattered the second 2 mouth breathers from Yonkers decided his personal life offended their delicate sensibilities. Cue the moral collapse, the manufactured outrage, and the inevitable execution. Yet what truly drives this storyline into the realm of biting satire isn't just the mob's reaction. It's the women, particularly Vito Soprano, the self-declared progressive mouthpiece, forever sermonizing about justice and tolerance, couldn't sprint fast enough to be the bearer of the big scoop. In a show obsessed with loyalty, she betrayed someone's life for the thrill of being in the know. The writers deserve full credit here. Vito's hypocrisy isn't subtle, but it's masterfully positioned. And she's not alone. The entire ensemble of wives and girlfriends, normally so quick to close ranks in times of crisis, suddenly forget how to feign empathy. Marie, Vito's wife, is left to twist in the wind. Of course, she was never quite one of them, a fact the others use as a convenient excuse to abandon any show of solidarity. No whispered support, no casseroles of condolence, just cold silence. Ironically, the only display of human decency comes from the Leotardos. Yes, those Leotardos. Phil and his wife Patty at least had the grace to visit Marie and sit with her like actual human beings. They didn't flip on the TV. They didn't pretend to care. They simply showed up. In Naples, they'd be called mensch. In this context, they're practically saints. And let's dispense with the predictable objection. No, this isn't about forgetting Vito's sins. Yes, he killed someone. So did everyone else. The difference is, he dared to be himself. And in this world, that's the greater crime. Vito's death wasn't just a hit. It was a perfectly choreographed symphony of cowardice, judgment, and gossip, dressed up as moral outrage. And the saddest part? Everyone played their part beautifully. Tony Soprano never had blood on his hands, because he made sure someone else did. When Jackie Aprile Jr. commits the unforgivable, robbing a card game, shooting Furio, and firing at Christopher, he effectively signs his own death warrant. The rules are ironclad. You don't shoot at made men and expect to walk away. But instead of handing down the inevitable sentence himself, Tony Soprano curiously passes the decision to Ralph Cifaretto, Jackie's not-quite stepfather and resident chaos agent. Why? Because, in classic Soprano fashion, Tony isn't dodging responsibility. He's weaponizing it. First, the move traps Ralph in a no-win scenario. If he spares Jackie, he loses even more respect from a crew already skeptical of his judgment. If he hasn't clipped, he carries the guilt of whacking a kid he once treated like a son. A kid whose descent into mob life Ralph himself orchestrated with all the foresight of a blindfolded arsonist in a fireworks factory. Either way, Ralph squirms. Tony savors. Second, Tony wants to preserve his own hands as metaphorically clean as possible. He knows Jackie Jr. must die, but he's not interested in being the one who swings the sword. Especially not when the optics are so volatile. This is the son of his deceased best friend, after all. Instead, he delegates the sentence to the captain most likely to flinch or fumble, and then watches from a calculated distance. If Ralph gives Jackie a pass, Tony gets to play the wise Don who deferred to his underboss. If Ralph has Jackie killed, Tony sighs and says it was Ralph's call. And when the fallout inevitably lands, it lands on Ralph. Of course, Tony's brilliance isn't just in the delegation, it's in the layered punishment. Ralph never fully recovered in Tony's eyes after the Tracy incident. This moment allows Tony to grind that axe with subtle cruelty. Forcing Ralph to kill Jackie is a twisted form of retribution, a poetic reversal. Ralph disrespected life casually. Now, he must extinguish it personally. It's the kind of move that hurts precisely because it's dressed up as responsibility. Then, there's the broader political theater. After Ralph's eventual and highly suspicious demise, he fell, Tony wastes no time redirecting attention, even picking a fight with Johnny Sack to muddy the waters. The man didn't just play chess, he used live pieces and rigged the board. Tony's real genius wasn't in his brutality. It was in how seamlessly he camouflaged it under layers of delegation, plausible deniability, and just enough sentimentality to keep anyone from calling it what it was: manipulation. And let's not forget that Ralph was largely to blame for Jackie Jr.'s spiral. Tony made it clear: keep the kid out of the life. Ralph, ever the irresponsible surrogate, did the opposite. He played mentor to Jackie's worst instincts, sharing war stories, giving him a gun, letting him pretend. By the time Jackie Jr. made his fatal move, he'd been fed just enough fantasy to believe he had a future in the mob. Ralph didn't just enable the disaster, he scripted it. So when Tony tells Ralph, "You took this kid under your wing, schooled him as best you could," it isn't comfort. It's a dagger, sheathed in sarcasm. Tony isn't absolving Ralph. He's making it his tragedy, his problem, his mess to clean up. In the end, Tony Soprano gets everything he wants. Justice served, blood off his hands, a rival humiliated, and his own image burnished with strategic sorrow. Delegation, after all, is the art of letting others do your dirty work, preferably with a smile and a pat on the back. The final scene of The Sopranos didn't fade to black. It cut, because that was Tony's last second alive. For 6 seasons, The Sopranos crafted a world where the viewer didn't just watch Tony Soprano, they became him. The series meticulously unfolded through his eyes, his choices, his contradictions. We sat in on therapy sessions, wandered through fever dreams, and lingered behind his glazed stare as he toggled between ruthless mobster and wounded patriarch. So when the screen famously cuts to black in the final seconds of the finale, mid-chew, mid-scene, mid-life, it isn't just a stylish choice, it's a narrative mic drop. To insist on seeing Tony's death play out in all its cinematic gore is to misunderstand the fundamental structure of the show. The story was always told through his point of view, and when that perspective ends, so does the show. Abruptly, jarringly, without warning. One moment he exists, the next, oblivion. That is the genius. No third-person omniscient moment of closure, just a cold, nihilistic void that mirrors the reality of death, unceremonious, immediate, and unimpressed by the myth of one's own significance. The absence of end-credit music only intensifies this existential gut punch. There's no swelling orchestration to mourn the loss of a crime lord. Just silence, 2 minutes of it, as the screen remains black and the viewer is left to sit with the nothingness. For a man who looms so large, who was the gravitational center of the show's universe, it's a ruthless reminder that even the biggest personalities vanish without fanfare. Tony didn't get a curtain call. He didn't even get a moment to realize what was coming. And that's precisely the point. The entire narrative led to this, the peeling away of ego and delusion until all that remained was an inevitable, anonymous end. A death without drama. No final words, no bloody montage. Just gone. There was once hand-wringing over whether Tony really died, as if ambiguity was an accidental byproduct rather than the very essence of the conclusion. But to suggest otherwise is to ignore the meticulous groundwork laid in the episodes leading up to it. The foreshadowing was not subtle. The sense of encroaching doom practically clung to every frame. The cut to black isn't a Rorschach test, it's an execution. What makes this ending resonate, years later, across rewatches and reanalyses, isn't just its boldness, but its brutal honesty. We all live from the inside out. We are, each of us, the center of our own narrative. But death doesn't come with a montage or a slow fade. It comes like this, mid-bite, mid-thought, mid-life. Black. And so Tony Soprano, the man we shadowed for 6 seasons, the man whose dreams we dreamed, ends not with a bang or a whimper, but with a void. What more could you want? A boutonniere? Janice Soprano is worse than any mobster in the entire series, and yes, that includes Ralph. There are characters in The Sopranos who provoke debate, inspire analysis, and leave audiences torn between sympathy and revulsion. And then there's Janice, an irredeemable cocktail of hypocrisy, opportunism, and unflinching narcissism. With every scene she infects, the show reminds us that not all monsters carry guns. Some just carry yoga mats and self-righteousness. From the moment she drags her spiritually bankrupt self back into Tony's life, Janice embarks on a one-woman crusade to outdo herself in audacity. She flits between fake enlightenment and unfiltered cruelty like she's flipping through a self-help pamphlet with one hand and robbing an amputee with the other. Yes, the prosthetic leg incident. A moment so grotesquely on brand, it practically deserves its own Emmy. Stealing a dead woman's limb to manipulate her way into Bobby's affections isn't just low, it's subterranean. Her latest grotesque act, worming her way into Bobby's home mere moments after Karen's death, is the sort of calculated, soul-sucking maneuver only Janice could pull off without so much as a blink. And of course, Tony, ever the enabler, applauds her as though she's some kind of grieving support angel rather than a grief predator. Their shared DNA is less family tree, more biohazard. It's tempting to label her a cartoon villain, but that would be a disservice to cartoons. Janice isn't content with moral decay, she marinates in it. Her shamelessness isn't incidental, it's her guiding principle. She fakes religiosity, plays the victim with Broadway-level theatrics, and repackages other people's food as her own culinary masterpiece, because nothing says nurturing partner like stealing a casserole. And then there's Ralph. When these two cesspools of humanity paired up, it felt like the cosmos finally aligned. Their relationship wasn't so much a romance as it was a karmic containment unit. Garbage meeting garbage, sealed tightly for everyone's protection. Ralph's eventual death at Tony's hands was not just satisfying, it was an act of mercy for the viewers. One down, one to go. Even Janice's rare moments of decency, like shooting Richie, reek more of self-preservation than moral clarity. Still, watching her get slapped around by Russian mobsters for stealing that leg? A rare and exquisite moment of cosmic justice. She doesn't learn, of course. Why would she? Janice doesn't evolve. She metastasizes. And yet, somehow, on the fifth watch, she tiptoes toward comedy. A twisted kind of tragicomic genius emerges from her unrelenting performance art of selfishness. Like Junior's non sequiturs or Polly's paranoia, Janice becomes her own category of spectacle. One moment you want to throw your TV out the window, the next, you're laughing at the absurdity of a woman who once faked carpal tunnel syndrome to grift disability checks. In the end, Janice is less a character than a mirror, a reflection of Tony's own bottomless self-interest, polished with delusion and dressed in spiritual cosplay. She's detestable, yes, but deliberately so. And perhaps that's the point. You hate her, you pity her, you mock her, but above all, you remember her. And if you're lucky, you get to watch her ribs almost get broken for stealing a dead woman's leg. Finally, some symmetry in the universe. Tony Soprano didn't mercy kill Christopher. He used a baby seat to justify cold-blooded murder. By the time Christopher Moltisanti met his untimely, and let's not pretend highly convenient, end in The Sopranos, Tony Soprano was no longer teetering on the edge of moral ambiguity. He jumped headfirst into the abyss and was lighting a cigar on the way down. Let's dispense with the fantasy that Christopher died purely from injuries sustained in the crash. The car accident may have set the stage, but Tony's hand delivered the final act. And no, this wasn't a mercy killing. It was an execution, wrapped in a neat little package of self-justification and delusion. The baby seat in the back, untouched, pristine, wasn't just a visual cue for the audience. It was Tony's internal get-out-of-jail-free card. That infant car seat, struck by a tree, became the moral smokescreen through which he could paint himself as a reluctant savior. He brings it up again and again, not because it matters, but because he needs it to matter. If Chris was a danger to his own child, well then maybe, just maybe, Tony was doing the world a favor. Or so he tells himself. But strip away the self-soothing rationalizations, and what's left is a mob boss exploiting a moment of weakness. Literally. Chris is pinned, wheezing, and begging for help. Tony doesn't hesitate. He doesn't call an ambulance. He closes his flip phone with the finality of a death knell. Because the truth is simple. Tony wanted him dead. The crash didn't force his hand. It gave him cover. And Tony, ever the tactician, doesn't stick around for the grief. He absconds to Las Vegas, ostensibly for peace, but in reality, to bed Christopher's mistress and spiritually cleanse himself in the most grotesquely self-indulgent way possible. Mourning? Please. Tony wasn't mourning. He was celebrating freedom from an inconvenient liability. Make no mistake, Christopher was spiraling. He had become a walking time bomb, increasingly unstable and dangerously unpredictable. Shooting a screenwriter in the head and leaving the body to rot was only the latest red flag in a parade of crimson banners. It wasn't a question of if Chris would implode, it was when, and who he'd take down with him. Tony knew this. He knew Chris would fold under pressure, knew he'd trade loyalty for survival the moment he was caught. And so, when that twisted opportunity came, metal twisted, lungs crushed, no witnesses, Tony didn't flinch. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment panic. This was an overdue decision waiting for the right excuse. Even the writers tipped their hand. A line tossed out by Christopher's mother or in-law. The doctors said he might have made it, but he didn't. A subtle but deliberate nod. If there was any lingering ambiguity about whether Tony merely let fate take its course, it vanishes here. Tony didn't kill a dying man. He killed a man who might have lived. By season 6, Tony Soprano is well past redemption, and the show knows it. Every action, every deflection, every smug manipulation is designed to expose the rot inside him. Even his attempt to coax Carmela into admitting her own relief over Christopher's death isn't about honesty, it's about validation. If she feels it too, maybe he's not the monster he knows he is. But he is. And Christopher's death isn't a tragedy, it's a calculation. Cold, strategic, final, and utterly Tony. Tony Soprano wasn't a criminal genius. He was a reckless narcissist pretending to play chess with live bullets. Tony Soprano, self-anointed kingpin and self-sabotaging tactician, demonstrated one of his most baffling lapses in judgment when he decided to murder Matt Bevilacqua with Salvatore Big Pussy Bonpensiero in tow, a man he suspected of being a federal informant. Nothing says master strategist like committing murder alongside the very person you might need to murder next. If Tony truly had suspicions about Pussy ratting, the last thing he should have done is invite him to the scene of a crime. That's not just reckless, it's practically gift-wrapping leverage for the feds. Involving Pussy forced a dangerous test of loyalty. If he didn't pull the trigger, his cover would have been blown. And if he did, Tony could convince himself, at least temporarily, that Pussy wasn't wearing a wire. Spoiler, he was. This wasn't just a hit on Bevilacqua. It was Tony's makeshift loyalty check. He was grasping at straws, desperate to believe that Jimmy Altieri was the rat, while the real danger slept just a few feet away on his boat. Tony wouldn't get undeniable proof until later, when Pussy got a little too comfortable discussing the calling card scam with Furio. The subsequent search of his room and the discovery of the wire removed any lingering doubt. But until then, Tony used the only tool he had, performance under pressure. And let's not pretend this wasn't about more than logistics. Tony's obsession with action, his craving to avoid the suffocating regularness of life, made him reckless. He wanted to see Pussy shoot the kid. He needed to see it. Not just to confirm allegiance, but to quiet the gnawing paranoia in his gut. Of course, a boss is supposed to insulate himself from direct involvement in hits. But Tony, ever the hands-on micromanager of mayhem, saw things differently. He'd already shot his nephew Christopher in a drug-fueled haze. He was spiraling, emotional, and impulsive. In other words, Tony was being Tony. One might argue that in the twisted world of The Sopranos, this kind of impulsive decision-making is exactly what cements Tony's role at the top. He calls the shots, literally. And if you're questioning his methods, well, you're welcome to leave, or end up in the Meadowlands. Tony Soprano isn't just a mobster, he's a fantasy. And the show pretends it's realistic. The Sopranos, television's masterclass in cognitive dissonance. Here we have Tony Soprano, a man whose face might as well be on New Jersey's currency, parading around town as the alleged mob boss everyone somehow knows about, yet miraculously manages to dodge prison with the same grace he dodges therapy breakthroughs. It's almost poetic, if not utterly absurd. The central question, of course, is whether it's remotely plausible that someone as conspicuous as Tony could be so publicly linked to organized crime without ever facing real legal consequences. Spoiler, yes, to a point. But even the most celebrated real-world gangsters had the decency to act like they were hiding. The show wants it both ways. Tony is a household name, a suburban don with a reputation large enough to make the evening news, but somehow still too slippery for a basic weapons charge to stick. When local cops finally try to make anything happen, the feds swoop in to pull rank. Not because they're dirty, no, but because they're playing the long game, the RICO case, the holy grail of organized crime prosecutions. Forget a quick conviction. They want to end him, not inconvenience him. The legal logic behind this is sound if you're trying to build a bulletproof case. Charging Tony with a low-level offense, like illegal gun possession, might actually weaken a future racketeering indictment. Once you arrest him, you tip your hand, and unless you're ready to put him away for good, you risk giving him just enough warning to clean up his operation, silence witnesses, or disappear behind layers of plausible deniability. Of course, there's a less flattering reality. Even when law enforcement knows what someone like Tony is doing, they often don't have the evidence. Wiretaps, surveillance, and flipped associates take years to develop into something prosecutors can bring to trial with confidence. And they're not looking for a technicality. They're looking for an open and shut saga of criminal enterprise. Until then, Tony gets to live his best life, eating gabagool, committing assault in broad daylight, and, naturally, managing a strip club. Speaking of which, the show takes some dramatic liberties with its depiction of public violence. The occasional street beating, sure, but laptop smashing in a university classroom? Running someone over on school property? These aren't subtle acts of intimidation. They're felony charges waiting to happen. Even in a pre-cell phone era, the idea that these events occur without legal consequence is less realistic ambiguity and more writer's convenience. Still, it's not entirely fiction. Consider the likes of John Gotti or Frank Costello, mobsters who were revered by their communities even as they were hunted by the law. In certain neighborhoods, the mob was preferable to the police. They handed out money, kept the streets safe in their own warped way, and operated with a code of silence that made investigations nearly impossible. Witnesses didn't cooperate, not only because they feared retaliation, but because they simply didn't trust the system. Even today, that dynamic persists in gang-dominated areas. Law enforcement may be watching, but without testimony or hard evidence, they're spectators like the rest of us. A particularly charming anecdote. When Gotti once beat a man over a traffic dispute, the victim quickly decided he didn't see anything after learning who his assailant was. That's not fiction. That's fear wrapped in admiration. So yes, Tony's longevity outside prison walls is improbable, but not implausible. The series spans only about 5 to 6 years of his life, barely a blink in federal investigative time. The FBI is portrayed as methodical, cautious, and maddeningly patient, and in that window, Tony remains under constant surveillance, running a shadow economy through supposedly legitimate businesses, garbage routes, construction contracts, clubs, and pizza joints, all useful for laundering cash and obscuring his real income. In short, Tony survives because he's smart, insulated, and, for the time being, useful to the feds. Not quite realistic, but not entirely fantastical either. It's less that he's invincible, and more that his prosecutors are perfectionists. They're not interested in a footnote on a weapons charge. They're waiting to write the final chapter. Until then, the Don enjoys his cutlets and chaos with impunity, and we, the viewers, remain complicit in the fantasy.